guys, I wanted to put together a sewing one-on-one video because I know a lot of you asked kind of just to start at the basics for it. I thought about doing Zoom, but the thing is it's going to be hard to get to actually zoom in and out of the parts that I want you to see. So I thought it'd be easier just to record it, put it this way. If you have any questions, please just post it below. Happy to answer them as we go through this. So I just want to start off, huge caveat is I don't have professional training, so I've kind of learned all of this on my own going through the years. I started off, I don't know, right after college working on quilts, and then Project One Ray kind of turned me into trying out garments. So it was only just a couple years ago that I picked up a pattern for the first time. I think an apron was what I started with, and then just watching online videos. I did take a couple things through, like classes through Sew Expo, which I really enjoy, but just learning through the years. So everything I tell you, I can't say it's 100% accurate. It's just the way that I do things and things that I've learned and picked up on. So if you want, you can always go watch online videos, pick up a book, go take a class, go do some formal learning, but this is just my ad hoc learning. What I want to cover today is just showing you the different types of machines. I'll show you the three that I have, and then we'll go through a little bit about what is different between them, different types of fabric, so woven versus knit, and why you would work one over the other and kind of what the differences of that are. I'll go through my favorite tools that I have and what I think is necessary if you want to sew, and then we'll go to the machine. I'll show you how to set it up in terms of the bobbin and getting it all ready to go, where you thread it, and we will go a little bit through the basics of sewing, and then I'll stop it after that. So we're just kind of doing a very high level. If you already know how to sew, this video is probably not for you, but if you're like, I have a sewing machine and I have no clue what to do or know nothing, this will be the one for you. So let's start off. I'm going to tell you about the sewing machine. This is what everyone will probably have, and probably the only machine they'll have, but you can do everything with the sewing machine. It might not have the prettiest finishes per se, but you can sew everything together with it. The one I have is a Janome Skyline S7. It has the computer screen, and then it basically allows me to touch the different types of stitches that I want to do. It automatically sets the stitch length and the stitch width. On that one, I can tell you what the settings are anytime I click on it, but just know me specifically, if I have to sew something, I'm not thinking, oh, what's the length and the width that I want? I just do whatever the machine tells me to do. So I normally do whatever the basics are for that one. So I would say most of the time on the sewing machine, when I go for that is just, I'm doing a straight stitch. I'm working with a woven and I just want to stitch it straight down. But of course, like I said, you can sew anything with the sewing machine. This next one is a serger. I have the Baby Lock Imagine, and I will say I love this machine. This is my favorite machine. I'm probably on it whenever I'm sewing anything, probably the majority of the time. So you would use this when you want to finish the seams off really nicely, and I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. But basically you can set it. It comes with a spot where you can have 4 threads. See the 4? You can normally do 3 or 4 for the overlock. I always do 4 because it is a stronger hold. I will tell you, I had a Juki before this, and it makes you set the tension. It's a manual tension thing where you have to turn the knobs, and then you also had to manually thread it yourself. And I was in tears so many times that I was like, I'm over this. I traded it in and got this one. I am in love with this machine, like I said, but it is an automatic tension, so I don't have any dials that I need to mess with. And then also it allows me to use this lovely threading thing, which makes it really easy to get the thread in place. So normally on a normal serger, what you have to do is if a thread by chance breaks, I mean, think about anytime you want to change a thread color, right? Anytime it breaks, you got to take all this apart and like manually do it yourself using tweezers to get it through. And if you didn't do it in the proper order, in the proper setting, then it would never work out. So that's what the serger is. It's really good for knits. So when you want something with stretch, this is the machine for you. You actually can just make these little chains, if you can see the chain, and you don't even need fabric going through there. So I can just press it and it makes this lovely chain for that one. This is a cover stitch by Baby Lock. Looks a little bit similar to a serger, and what you'll see is there's actually spots where you could have 4 spools of thread. Normally you'll see only 3 be used at a given time, and basically cover stitch is used to finish off your edges, so like your neckline, your sleeves, your hem, anything like that. So what it'll look like is there will be 2 straight stitches on the top portion, and then on the bottom it kind of goes back and forth a little bit surged like on the reverse side of it. This particular thing, for this cover stitch, you normally use, you'll see there's 2 needles here, they're close together, so that will be a narrow stitch when I do these, or I could take the one on the right and move it over a little bit of space, and then it would just be wider for those 2. But normally you only see 2 needles on the top, 1 on the bottom, and it just gives you a nice little finished edge. I grabbed some ready-to-wear items that I just bought at the store so you could see the different types of stitches. I'll tell you what machine it was made on as well. So this came from the Gap. It is a men's shirt, and this basically was all done with the sewing machine. It's just a pure straight stitch. So if you want to look, let's see if I can get these in. You can see this is just a straight stitch this way. If I reverse it, again, these are all straight stitches. The nice thing about the seams, there's different ways that you can do this where you can fold it. I'm not going to go through it in this video, but you'll see it is a straight stitch and it's got a fold. And if I come in, again, straight stitch on a fold. So you're not seeing kind of that unraveling that cotton will do because it's just the way that they sewed that whole thing together. So again, this whole thing, because it is cotton woven, no stretch, they just did it with a sewing machine straight stitch. Next, I have a women's sun-dry knit top right here, and what I want to show you is the inside here. The 2 pieces, they went ahead and serged them together so that it has a nice finish on both sides. Nothing unraveling there. And then for the neckline, they used a cover stitch machine. Let me see if I can zoom in, not zoom in, get close without it going crazy. So there's 2 lines, you can see that, straight stitches there. And then on the back, it's gonna be this finished, fancier little edge. So cover stitch will do 2, whether it's a narrow stitch or a wide stitch, and then the back is gonna be that nice finish. Normally you use these. The cover stitch is going to be for neckbands as well as for hems, and then even like around the sleeves too. Now let's get into the actual fabric, so woven versus knit. Just think about that. Woven is comprised of 2 different yarns. So you have ones that go up and down, so vertical, and then you have some that go horizontal like this. So they make these 90-degree angles when you look at it. The thing about that is it's mostly going to be cotton, sort of like if you think about quilting cotton, that's gonna always be woven. But anything that pretty much doesn't have stretch, I won't say 100% doesn't have stretch, but pretty much the fabrics that don't stretch, they will mostly be woven. So this is just an example. Let me turn it to the back, get a little closer if you can see it. Actually you can't, but that's all right. But it's gonna be tightly woven. They're just doesn't stretch this way, doesn't stretch that way, but that is what basically woven is. Now, when they talk about bias, if you ever hear a bias, it basically is thinking about a diagonal here. So you're going across that way. If you pull it that way, you will see it does actually have some stretch to it. So when they ever say cut on the bias, it means you are going to be cutting this direction. Otherwise, you're pretty much cutting your fabric always on the grain line, whether it's up and down or it's going to be horizontal that way. That way, when you put it together, it's not going to have stretch where it shouldn't have stretch. So that is going to be your woven. One thing I will call out is you can kind of see how this is unraveling at the top right here. And then this is one that I actually took out of the dryer and I haven't done with anything. So they're always gonna unravel. It's just the way it is. You're gonna cut off those edges after you get it out of the dryer. And then when you sew your pieces together, you wanna make sure, we're not gonna go through it today, but you'll wanna make sure you finish that edge because it will, even though that it's seamed together, it's just gonna have that unraveling and you'll feel it on the inside of your outfit if you're wearing something like that. So that's why the Gap had that lovely way of the way they folded it is you don't actually see the seam on that one, but you can always just zigzag the edges of that and that will prevent it from unraveling as well. Next one is going to be knit. Knit is different just because of how it is made up. It's just one yarn, it's one continuous yarn, and then they just form these little loops. So the best one I have is this sweater knit, and I'm going to see if you can maybe see it from the back. Let me get in nice and close. If you get in close, you can see it's not that basket weave sort of up and down. It's just kind of this little I don't even know what you would call it, but they're all weaved together in these continuous loops. So that's what knit is. The nice thing about it, if you look on the edges, is they don't unravel, right? Because it's just the way that they're made. So when you sew these seams together, you don't actually have to finish them off because they're not going to come apart like the other one would, which is really nice. However, the only difference is on this one is you're not going to be able to use a straight stitch like you would for the woven. So if I try to do it a straight stitch, say that 2 times fast, right? If you try to do that and then you try to put it on, it's number one, not going to stretch out. So if you're trying to put it on, like say for a waistband, it won't stretch out. And then eventually you're just going to pop that seam in that stitch that you did, and then it's all going to come undone. But you can still sew with knit on the sewing machine. You're just going to need to make sure you use a zigzag stretch or the stretch stitch if that comes with your machine. So still totally doable to sew with that one. My favorite though is this. It's a double brushed poly is what they call it, and it's just so soft. So if you look at my closet, pretty much almost everything in there is going to be knit because I just love being comfortable and being able to stretch with you and not feel like I'm all like tense and tight on that one. One more thing I want to talk about a little bit is stretch percentage. So basically that's the amount of stretch that can be within the knit. And if you're looking at a bunch of patterns, it will specifically tell you like you need a stretch percentage at least of 75 or whatever that number is, right? And I'm not going to tell you how to calculate that today, but basically what you would do is take the fabric and see how much it stretches out. So this is actually a big one that stretches out quite a bit. If I took the same one and did this, it doesn't quite, actually I'm going the wrong way. It doesn't quite stretch out as much still, right? So that's where we would then do that calculation and figure out which one, what it would actually be. And I should say the same thing about knit is it stretches both ways, but there will always be one way that stretches a little bit more than the others. So this one, as you can see, will stretch a lot further than if I turn it the other direction and try to stretch it. So they both stretch, it's just one side will give you much more stretch, and that's always the way that you're going to want to do it around your body. Now I want to walk you through the supplies that I have that I normally would use, not every single time, but the majority of the time if I'm going to be doing certain things. These are my sort of go-to items. So starting off is my cutting mat. So I have a bigger one actually downstairs. This is not my sewing area at all. I kind of got kicked out of the office when Sean started working from home. So this is like my little makeshift sewing area that happens to also be in our bedroom. So there you go, and our little workout room. Kind of 3-in-1 here. But this is a cutting mat. So basically when you're going to be cutting out your patterns, you need to make sure you're not going to be doing it on the carpet, on the floor, or anything like that. And then what I like about this, it's going to be big enough and it has these lovely lines, so you can always cut along the line and you know what would be straight for that one. Going along with this is I have this handy dandy ruler. This one is 24 inches long, but basically, so if you want to cut straight edges, just line it up and then cut it along here. And then also, you're trying to measure fabric out, this allows you to do that as well. So definitely need a bigger ruler. I would say one thing that I use most of the time is going to be this rotary cutter. So I normally use this to go around the pattern and the fabric. And especially if you're going to be doing those long lines, like I said, using that ruler, it's easy just to zip it on up and cut it out. This one has this little locking system, so then you can't accidentally open that up. If you aren't using a rotary cutter, you want to make sure you have fabric scissors. So these are very, very different than your normal scissors. You never want to use this to cut out paper. It is only for fabric only, okay? They're very sharp. This particular one is for knit, so it actually has kind of a serrated edge on it. But make sure you have your fabric scissors only for fabric, not for paper. Along with that, we also have a little ruler. You can use either one, they both work. Basically, you're gonna be checking on your seam allowance. So what is a seam allowance? Let's say you have some fabric and their seam allowance is gonna be 1/2 inch. So if I have 2 pieces of fabric, I'm gonna line them up together. and then I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch from this side. So in order to check what your seam allowance is as you're pinning your stuff together, is you would use this, and so set it to 1/2 inch, and then that will tell you where that should be done at, right? So if you don't have this particular one, just a smaller ruler that will allow you to check that would be ideal. Going along with kind of what we were talking about is pattern weights. So these are like little bean bags. There's other ones out there as well, but you would lay your pattern out on top of this mat because you want to cut it out, and then you don't want it to shift, so then you just kind of sporadically place these pattern weights all around, and that will keep that in place. Of course, you want to make sure you have a measuring tape, so especially if you're doing garment sewing, you have to first take your measurements in certain areas of your body. Don't always assume, like, let's just say you're a size 6. Don't always assume just because it says you're a size 6 and ready to wear clothes that you're always a size 6 in every pattern you do. It just isn't going to work that way. Also, it allows you to customize your clothes too. So if you're like me, or I'm just straight, so my waist doesn't really go in that much. So then when I get a pattern, I can customize it to me, saying like, I'm going to be in this, this what am I trying to say? Size. I'm in this size at the top, and then I'm going to go a bigger size on the next for the waist, and then I'm going to go back to the smaller size for the hips. So then you can customize it to yourself too. But you only know that if you have your measuring tape and do the right measurements. This thing is called That Purple Thing. That's literally what the name of the tool is. And what I use this for is to punch out corners. So let's say we sew a pillowcase together, and we have to turn it inside out. So you flip it all the way out. And most of the time what will happen is when you get to the curve, it's just like a rounded curve because that little fabric inside is caught. So that's what this tool is for. You reach in there and you kind of help push it up. It's got a rounded point, so it shouldn't make any holes in that fabric for you. There's a bunch of different options of this. This is a water erasable fabric marking pen is what it's called. So if you want to trace the outline of anything or make notes in the fabric, then you can use this. And of course, once you machine wash it, it all goes away. And then another thing you could also do, this is kind of like a wax crayon chalky thing, and there's a bunch of different colors of those. So you can use this also to mark your fabric. My probably least favorite tool is going to be a seam ripper, so it looks like that. If you ever see me using this, I'm in a bad mood. Basically, is what that means. So if you make a mistake on a project, it's just going to happen. I mean, it's normal. You're going to have to take out the seam and redo it, and so that is what this lovely thing is for. So make sure you definitely have one because you're definitely going to need it. The next one will be clips. So I got these actually from Christmas, but they come on Amazon, and they're really helpful and useful. They just clip things together, whether it's fabric or patterns or whatever you're using. Just hold it in place. You got the clips, they don't make holes, but there are at times when you're gonna need your pens as well. So sharp pins. I love this little holding dish. It's magnetic, so I can turn it upside down. It doesn't fall, but it's really helpful. So if you drop something on the floor and you're not sure where it is, just roll this all over the floor and it'll pick them all up and grab them. Next is going to be our thread. So there's a bunch of different types of thread when you go to the store. This is polyester. I would say if you're gonna sew with garments or actually pretty much anything. If you're sewing with anything, I would say use polyester or cotton. And then you'll see there's rayon thread as well, and that's more for like your embroidery type stuff, or pretty designs that you don't actually need a seam to hold something together with. Otherwise, you're going for this sort of look. Next is going to be your bobbins. So you use these bobbins in the sewing machine. There's a clear one, that's for my machine, and then I'll show you Ava's machine. Hers uses the metal one. So just make sure you read the manual for your particular machine so you know which one of these that you should be buying. We're almost done. So next one is going to be your needles. These are your sewing machine needles. There's different types, as you can see. I have on here jersey, stretch, jeans, and then the universal and then there's numbers at the bottom. You see that? I don't know, it's kind of blurry. So just make sure you check the numbers whenever a pattern might call for a certain number, just check it on that. And then if I grab one of these out of here, the hole for the thread is down at the bottom. And then if you look, it's hard without zooming in. One of these sides is gonna have a flat side, and then the other is gonna be rounded. So the flat side is always the one that's gonna be facing backwards, like towards that back wall over there. These are the ones that will go inside of your sewing machine. The hand sewing needle is going to have that pointy end, but instead the hole where the needle would go through is going to be on this end instead. So that's the difference. The hole goes on here if it's for the sewing machine, and then over here if it's going to be for hand sewing, so you can attach the thread to it. The last one I want to show you is going to be these particular things for the sewing machine. So we talked about the cover stitch and how they had those two single straight lines, and then on the back it's really pretty. You can kind of make do with a sewing machine and have a similar look from the front, at least not necessarily from the back, by using these awesome tools. So it's called a twin needle, as you can see. So it still has that one spot where you're just going to attach it into the sewing machine. And then they have a narrow version and then a wide version as well. You will need two separate things of thread, spools of thread, so that you can send it through one and then send it through the other. And then, like I said, that's a nice way to finish your sleeves and your neckline and all that stuff if you're sewing garments from the sewing machine. So it'll give you kind of more of that professional look as well. So those are kind of the main sort of supplies that I use whenever I'm sewing, depending on what the project is. Now I want to show you how I wind my bobbin on my machine. Every machine is different, so you'll definitely need to make sure you read the instructions in your user manual. But for mine, this is how we do it. So first you're going to take your spool of thread, and then this is the little stick that I'm going to go ahead and push mine through. My machine comes with this extra little piece, so I can put it on there, and that will keep the thread from here instead of falling off. And then mine is labeled, so there's a number 1 and the number 2. So I just follow what it tells me to do, which is just to wind it through on this side. And then for this thread, I'm going to come on over and attach my bobbin, which is going to be the clear one, on top of here. I normally circle around it maybe 5 times or so. Sometimes I don't do enough, and then basically it just doesn't go. Once you circle it around, you're going to push the bobbin to the right. And from there, my screen lit up and just says bobbin winding, so it knows that that's now what I'm wanting it to do. I'm going to hold on to that extra piece of thread and push down with my foot onto that presser foot. And now once it starts to go, I can let go, and you can see it's starting to get the color. So I just go, and then it will eventually stop, and that lets me know that I'm at the end of my bobbin winding. Since it stopped winding, that means it's done. I'm going to again move it from the right back to the left and take it off. Mine has a little cutter here, so I can just come back, cut it off, and then we're done with that. I want to show you what it's like to do the bobbin on Ava's machine. So hers has the little stick thing sticking up. I do feel like there's something that used to be here and we're totally missing it. I don't know what it is, but you'll see me hold this down just to keep it down. So her thread will come out, and then you can see the arrow. You're just going to follow it around. That's it. So hers is super easy. It does require the metal bobbin, so I'm going to put the metal one in there and wind it around a few times again. Instead of pushing it to the right like you would on mine, what you would do is on hers, you just take this and push this little lever to the left. And then once again, I'm just going to hold onto the thread, push my foot into that presser foot, and it goes. And it will automatically stop whenever it hits there. Her is right by her little razor thing is right behind it, so if I go behind there, it cuts it off for me. I want to walk you through how I actually thread my machine. So again, I have the thread just sitting up here, and then I'm going to go through for my machine again that number 1 and number 2 spot. Now instead of going to the back, I am going to head to the front. So you go down on the right side. And for me, number 3 says to do a U. Anytime you do this, mine automatically has the needle up, but just make sure that you have the needle in the up position as you do it. So you're gonna go and do that little U-y and come back up. So at the top, I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can make this go a little higher here. At the top, there is this little silver thing. So when you come around, you're gonna go from the right to the left. So you're just going around there and making sure that it gets caught through there. All right, it's coming back down. You're pulling it through. When you get to the bottom, mine is telling me that I need to go behind this silver thing. And then for mine, I know that I need to also go through that silver one. I come over here. And then most of them will have some sort of way that you can cut off the thread on the right-hand side. So that's how you cut that off. I will say mine has that special little feature where I'm supposedly allowed to push it down. It automatically threads the needle for me, and then I'm done. Not all of you are definitely going to have that. So from that point, whenever you finish threading it, you're just going to have to manually figure out how to get that thread through that little tiny hole over here. But otherwise, I'm done with the top spot. I want to show you how you would thread Ava's machine because it's slightly different, and I figure if I show you a couple different ways, maybe it'll make more sense whenever you look at the one you own as well. So thread stays here. Hers has this little silver thing in the back that you would actually go and get. And then again, there is that little silver thing. You want the needle up because you want to make sure the thing is towards the top so you'll catch it. You're going to go down on the right, loop it around, come back up. And then again, it's going to go from left to right. So it gets caught in that little thing. Hers goes behind the silver thing, and then it loops in between. There's a little thing you're going to get caught on. And then because hers doesn't have that needle threader, then at this point, you just have to manually get it back there through that little needle. There we go. Making sure it's not twisted. My machine also is a top loading bobbin. Some are front loading. Again, I'll show you Ava's in a little bit, and that will walk you through kind of how you would do that from that side. So for mine, for the top side, again, read your manual, but I'm gonna take this where the thread is clockwise. So it's going around the clock like that, right? So that's the direction I'm gonna hold it. I'm gonna put the bobbin inside, and then from here there's like this little silver, let's see if you can see it, a little silver thing. I'm gonna go underneath that silver and then come up and around. And number 2 has a little razor blade, so once I hit number 2, it just cuts it off for me. And then that's it. I'll just put the cover back on its place, and then we're done with that piece. As you can see, Ava has a front loading bobbin instead of the top loading like mine. So hers has this extra little piece that we would use. What you're gonna do is take the thread, and then you want to take the thread where it goes from bottom to top. So you're like moving it away from you, like that position. And take this other little piece. I have no absolute clue what it is called. But you're gonna take it where the open side is facing towards this, right? So push it in, and then there's like a little spot right here that you're gonna pull the thread through, and then you're gonna, I don't know how to explain this, pull it into that hole. So you wanna make sure it gets in this spot. So again, thread comes up and around, and then come through here into that little position. So now it is in place. The way to push this in is I open this, I'm holding onto this, and that will prevent the thread from falling out. And then you want the little stick facing upwards. You're gonna come on in and push until you hear a snap, like that. So now it is in, close the door. If you're gonna sew something that you would actually see that seam and you want it to be all nice and pretty, then before you start sewing, make sure you get the threads from the bottom, from the bobbin on, I'm sorry, yeah, from the bobbin on the bottom. That's a mouthful too. Otherwise, you can just keep sewing just like this. So what you would do is hold on to the top thread. And then for me, I have a button that will lower my needle. If you don't have that, you're just gonna use that little crank on that right-hand side, and you're going to turn it towards you. So turning that little knob towards you until it goes down and then comes back up. Eventually, when it gets to the top of the needle, this thread will become loose again. So continuing holding this thread right here, and then take some scissors or some other sort of long tool, and all you're gonna do is sweep it along the bottom, and that will pull up the thread from the bottom as well. And you're just gonna pull it through. So now I have the top thread and the bottom one. This is quite a bit, so let's just cut that off. So there you go. Bottom and top have now been pulled up, and I can begin sewing and not have to worry about it bunching on that bottom back side of it. Now let's just kind of go through a straight stitch. So I'm gonna have 2 pieces of woven fabric. And one thing I want to talk about a little bit is the right side versus the wrong side. So if you're looking at the fabric, the pretty side is gonna be called the right side, and then the other side is the wrong side. So most of the time when you are sewing, you're actually gonna sew with the right sides together. So both pretty sides will be facing each other like that. That way you'll sew the seam and then you'll open it up and see the pretty side underneath it. So I'm gonna take these 2, come to our sewing machine, and start on a straight stitch. Now when you begin, you're not starting the needle right at the edge, because otherwise everything's just gonna bunch up underneath. So you wanna go ahead and push it just a little bit past it. And I don't know, it's probably like 1/4 of an inch maybe or so past it. You'll start figuring out whenever you do it. And then from here, go ahead and lower down that presser foot. So the seam allowance, when you are trying to figure out a seam allowance, it's gonna be from this position, wherever the needle hits, to the edge right here. So whenever they say a seam allowance of 1/2 an inch or 1/4 of an inch or whatever it is that measurement from where that needle hits over to the edge here. To begin, if you're doing a seam, most of the time you want to make sure you lock it in place. So if I just did the straight stitch from here all the way to the other side, it'll look great, but eventually the thread's going to start unraveling. So you want to go ahead and lock it in place. The way you would do that is you sew forward a few stitches, and then you're going to sew backwards over those stitches you just did. Now you're going to go forward again and keep going straight. So that now locks that into place, so it won't come unraveled when you do it. We're going to do the same thing when we get to the end. So we're going to go forward a few, go backwards a few, and then go forward to finish it off. Now let's open it up. So here is what we just did. We sewed the right sides together so they look all pretty. And then on this side is our straight stitch. Again, it's locked at the beginning and it's locked at the end, so it won't come undone when we wash it. Your machine probably isn't going to have all these features, but I just want to go through them at least just so you understand what they are, in case I do have them as well. So I just have some fabric under here. And then here are the different types of buttons you have. So on mine, it has these little arrows, 1, 2, and 3. This is going to be the speed at which the machine goes. So if I move it all the way down to that 1 and I press my foot down as hard as it goes on my presser foot, it's still going to go super slow. And then I can speed it up just a little bit by going to that middle one or all the way to the end. And it goes crazy. So if you're beginning, you might want to move it down if you have this option to the slow one, and then you don't feel as crazy if you accidentally hit it and go too fast on that. There's also this little scissors. So if you happen to have that one, basically if you hit it, it's going to cut the threads and lift the presser foot, and then you can take it out. So that's another one. This is what my presser foot is. So if I press this, it lowers it and lifts it. The needle one is super important if you have this one. So by hitting this, it will then move the needle down, or hitting it, it moves it up. So why you would do that? If I want to sew, most of the time I sew with my needle down. That means let's go a few stitches. It's going to end in that needle down position. The reason I like to do that is sometimes I get stuck where I might have to lift the presser foot and move something around because something's off, but it doesn't lose the spot of where I was. Another reason is if, let's say you're sewing and you stop, you can lift the presser foot, turn it at 90 degrees, say you hit a corner, and then keep going. And again, you're not losing that spot. So that's that one. This little bullseye looking thing basically means it'll create a knot. So instead of the locking stitch going forward, back, forward, this just creates that knot. So pressing that, and then I press my foot, it's just gonna do it like 3 or 4 times in the same spot, make a little knot, and then it comes out. And then that other one is one you should somewhere on your machine have, and that lets you go backwards. So if I start going forward, I can press and hold this to get it to go backwards. And then if I let go, it goes forward again. So those are the different ones that I have on my machine. Let me know if there's something on yours you're not sure what it is, and we can answer that. For knits, what we're going to do is, instead of doing a straight stitch, we're going to do a zigzag stitch. So on my machine, when I click on the zigzag, it automatically sets it to the width being 3.0 and the stitch length being 1.5. So let's see what that looks like. So that's kind of what it looks like. If I want to adjust that a little bit, we can make that stitch length go up to, let's say, a 2, and then the width will move up. Let's just hit it at a 4 just so you can see the difference. So when you make that changes, you can see the width goes further this way, and then the length will actually make it a little bit this way. So you just have to play around with that depending on what the fabric is that you are using, on which one actually would be better for that. But again, knits, you're always going to make sure you do the zigzag just because it allows you to stretch it. That's all I got for your Sewing 101 class. So basically what I would recommend is grab some cotton, non-stretching fabric, play around with it, doing your straight stitches. You can also just grab some knit if you want to and do the little zigzag, see how that turns out. But let me know how it goes. Let me know what else you want to hear about. I'm happy to put any videos together for you. All right, you guys, bye.